Welcome to the latest episode of the Catalyst Health and Wellness Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bradford Cooper, and the topic on the table today is human performance. Dr. Fergus Connolly is joining us, one of the world's foremost human performance thought leaders and influencers. He has applied performance science with leading sports, military, and business teams, and is the only coach to have a full-time role in every major sports with teams, frankly, you would all recognize, including soccer, professional and college football, and rugby. This episode was one of my favorites we've done, and you'll see why very shortly. For those of you considering pursuing the National Board Certification as a health and wellness coach, you don't need to rush, but you might want to get serious about your options as the MBHWC requirements are changing later this year, and those changes are going to involve more time and more money on your part. So if you're on the fence, this might be a good time to jump in. Our next two fast track certifications, and you can pick either one or do the distance learning, are April 4th and 5th, and then June 13th and 14th. They likely will fill early due to the upcoming changes, so please contact us with any questions at results@catalystcoachinginstitute.com, or you can go ahead and get registered at catalystcoachinginstitute.com. And if it helps, there is a 6 months no interest option that's available. Now let's listen in as Dr. Fergus Connolly shares his valuable insights about human performance at all levels on this latest episode of the Catalyst Health and Wellness Coaching Podcast. Dr. Connolly, it's a privilege to have you. I really appreciated Dr. Singh suggesting we connect. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. And she's a wonderful expert and a wonderful person in her own right.
She really is. She really is in so many ways. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Well, talk to us about your journey. Our audience knows your background, but how did you end up doing what you're doing today?
Oh, I think this is where I'm supposed to tell people, to follow their passion and forget about all of these different things. Or maybe the other answer is, well, I had a plan and I stuck to it. And the truth is that I took a career break from teaching 15, almost 20 years ago, and I never went back. My plan was actually just to be a teacher. My father, I think teaching is actually probably the most important job, actually most important profession today. It's becoming more and more important. That's a whole other conversation. But my plan was to be a teacher and then coach kids playing sport in Ireland. And I just had a huge passion for sport, for understanding performance, for helping people, because as I was coming through, lots of different people had helped me. And then there were things I wanted to learn that I didn't get the opportunity to. And I just wanted to help share my lessons and experiences in sport with kids. And I was very passionate about performance, about sport, and about learning. So I would save up my money when I was at university and when I started teaching, and I would travel and visit teams and coaches to learn from them. And I was just fulfilling, an interest, a passion. And on one of these trips, I got offered a job. Shortly afterwards, a team called me and said, look, you were here. You were really interested. You seem to have a lot of knowledge about what we're doing. An opportunity has come up and we can't find anyone else who maybe shares your interest, passion for what you're doing. Would you be interested in joining us? And so, like I said, I took a career break thinking I'd do this for a year or two and then go back to a nice, steady, stable job teaching. And I've never gone back, and the job's long gone. So I have to keep doing this. But I started working in the Premier League in soccer as a strength coach, a sports scientist. Worked in rugby, worked in the NFL, worked in college sport, worked with some special operations groups. And I was fortunate, I guess, in that I started in elite sport and started with very, well-known, highly paid athletes. So that's a different demographic. But what was interesting over the years then was that I slowly started to recognize that they do need to be prepared in a particular way. And that is, there's no argument about that. But I started to notice that the foundation for long-term success were actually a lot of the basic principles that everybody's faced with.
Mm.
So that was a really interesting journey and understanding for me, and it was something that I had to learn. I think one other thing that might be of interest, to your listeners as well, is that I started really studying strength and conditioning, and I was led to believe, or I believed at the time, that well, if you're really strong, then you're going to be fast and you can prevent injury. And then I realized, okay, well, nutrition has a huge part to play in this. So I studied all that I could about it and about supplementation and about everything else. And then but I slowly started to notice then, well, psychology is important. And this kept going on and on, biomechanics, neurology, cardiopulmonary control, all of these different things. And it slowly dawned on me, you have to treat the person holistically and understand how all of these things are intertwined to create a foundation, first and foremost, on which you can build continued, sustained elite performance.
Excellent. Very well said. Very well said. Let's pull back the curtain a little bit for folks that don't get to see the stuff you see. So you've worked with incredibly successful athletes, coaches, you've been in those team settings, you've worked with the individuals. Could you share a couple stories from those settings, and we can keep it anonymous, but that might surprise people who don't regularly or ever spend time with those groups and maybe only get to see them from the outside?
I think what might surprise some people is that the many of the mainstream ideas, so eating a particularly very healthy, all athletes do, they don't. Many of them have very poor dietary lifestyles or poor lifestyle routines, but they manage to compensate because of a genetic advantage, perhaps athletically. And that they can manage that for a short period. But what you do recognize is that for sustained success, for very long careers, those athletes don't survive. But often, when you go and visit a team or an organization, you'll see guys eating, fried foods or candy or chocolate, or having very, unorthodox approaches to diet, nutrition, recovery, and it works. And so the very first thing is that some people think, oh, we have to change that. Well, that in itself brings incredible disruption, and you can lose the athlete. But you do recognize that over a long term, you have to slowly make those changes. So I guess what I really learned was that helping in a performer is driving on the freeway between the slow lane and the fast lane. You have to work at both speeds, and you have to recognize that. I think that's one of the things that people might find unusual. They might think that, well, elite teams have everything right, or elite performers do. Very often it's not the case at all.
That's really interesting, because you do think today, with all the information and the support staffs and everything else, that they'd have that dialed in. Is it just they look the other way when the athlete is such an elite performer? They just figure, I just don't want to mess with it? Or
I think a lot of it is that many athletes rely largely on physical abilities, which they have developed over a period of time. And if you look at society and you look at the sports industry, and it's really an entertainment industry at this point in time, many of them come from very poor, backgrounds, disadvantaged backgrounds. So they develop poor dietary habits because of socioeconomic situations. It's not that they choose that. And then it's very difficult, as we all know, to change a habit or to change from a food that you're used to eating. And particularly when a guy with a strange accent, sits down and tells them you need to be eating broccoli, and they're going, first of all, what is broccoli? And secondly, why? And well, I got here. What do you know? Like, that this is what's going through yeah, exactly. And this is what's going through their mind. So you just can't simply sit down and say, well, what you're eating is wrong, because they're going to look at you and say, well, I've 5 Pro Bowls, or, I've got 2 NBA rings, or you have to recognize and understand where they're coming from, and empathize that, many of these kids and athletes have achieved an awful lot in spite of what we might think are, poor lifestyle habits. And so that's the first thing, I think. The other thing is that in terms of developing the athlete, the collegiate system today is very much about how much money can the athletic department bring in. So it's not necessarily concerned with the long term benefit. They have an athlete here for 4 years or 3 years or 2 years or whatever it is. It's not. It's about getting short term results. So the long term investment in the athlete is not, the Jerry Maguire scenario. It does not really exist in sport, which is unfortunate, but that's because of the nature of the industry. So really, in order to make change, and your listeners will really appreciate this as well, the very first thing is to develop trust so that the athlete recognizes that you genuinely have their interest at heart. And just as an aside, I just had a text message from a player at the Patriots just thanking me for help that I'd given him over his career. And it's just nice to get that, because that's based on them recognizing that you have their best interests at heart. It's not a purely financial relationship. And that's very, very important if you want to build, if you want to change habits in your players or your athletes or your clients.
That's such a great reminder, because the coaches face similar things. They may not be working with the elite athlete, but maybe they have an executive they're working with or somebody else. And they're saying, why are you talking to me about my fill in the blank, sleep, eating habits, whatever? I'm the CEO, or I've done really well at this point. So what you're saying is you take a step back and you say, I'm just going to take this and I'm going to put it over to the side, and I'm going to focus on build the relationship. And then as that relationship builds, the trust will build. And then maybe we can come back to the broccoli or whatever it might be.
Yes. And it's, to use a military term, it's surfaces and gaps. So when you approach someone, you will get easy wins straight away, because there generally will be something that they have an issue with, and you can help address that. And so, that you're coming to them with a solution. So that's driving in the fast lane for a little bit. So you can move fast on that. You can make change on the things that they will resist against, which will make a difference. So using broccoli as the example, we put that in the slow lane for the time being. So I know that when I get trust built up with this other thing, for example, sleep, and I get buy-in, then I can move broccoli into the fast lane, and we can move fast with that. But there are some things that have to stay in the slow lane, and it's always individual. So with different players, they really want to, for example, change body composition. So maybe, broccoli and stuff can go into the fast lane quickly, and sleep is the one that has to stay in the slow lane. And so I don't ever just stop to build trust in a relationship. I'm always looking for a surface, which I have to put into the slow lane, and a gap, which I can exploit very quickly. And that builds trust as well. So it's always happening. It's building that relationship. But it all starts with understanding your client, and it is the same. I work with some executives as well, and it's the very same approach. But it all comes from truly understanding their fears and needs, and where you can get, where you can move in the fast lane with them, where you need to move in the slow lane, and bit by bit make progress.
Very good. Very good. All right. So speaking of the Patriots, I read your interview about Tom Brady's lasting success. I mean, the guy is just still crushing it. And you noticed that maintaining a healthy lifestyle, and you went through diet, sleep, strength, flexibility, spiritual, cognitive resilience. That's critical, not just to life, but the NFL, like at the highest levels. Are those same elements key to any high performer, or is it different for those that are focusing on non-athletic pursuits?
No, it's critical. And I'm not claiming any credit. Tom Brady's not a client of mine, before anybody gets excited. But no, I think it does. It's always the same. And it's the same in an elite military unit, an NFL quarterback, point guard in the NBA. It's the same for everybody. The foundational lifestyle principles are universal, because those superstars or incredibly successful people that we see on TV for whatever arena they might be in, they still need these pillars of performance to continue to build on, and they specialize then in a particular area. But for everybody, you can for short periods maybe cut corners, but you will not be able to sustain elite performance over a period of time if you don't have those foundations in place. And what what I've learned over the years as well is that emotional control or mental resilience or mental toughness, all of these things have a physiological basis on which they are built. So your diet will influence mood, which over time, if you don't respect it and don't regard it, you'll develop minor, I don't want to call them psychological problems, but for example, irritability. If you snack on a lot of sugary foods, you drink a lot of coffee, and you cut corners on your sleep, you will notice your personality. You can push it hard, but you will notice that your personality will have negative consequences, not just on you, but on the people that you work with. So that's an example of, cutting corners over a period of time. And that's the same for an elite performer. There are some differences where they do have to perform at a very high level, but it's usually only for short periods of a time. It's when you try and sustain those bad habits, that's when you'll crash and burn.
That's good. Yeah, and it's interesting. My PhD was basically focused on mental toughness, and our studies showed exactly what you're saying, that if you establish these things, your mental toughness is higher. If you're doing these things, and it wasn't the classic just grit your teeth and get out there, and it's what you're describing. So it's nice to see that consistency.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you've seen my TED talk, and I speak about my own instance of burning out, trying to look after too many people. But
yeah,
and I used to have written on my wall 16, 2, and 6, and my reason for that was that there were 16 hours work a day I could get done. I could get 2 hours for travel to and from work and for eating, and 6 hours of sleep. That was what I, during periods of very intense work, I would, aim for. And you can sustain that, but for a short period. You're not intended to do it for 2 years straight or for a year straight, which is where the mistake that I made, trying to look after too many people and not, prioritizing my own health as well. So I've been a victim of it. And that is why, elite units will only, have guys, for example, downrange or on tour for 6 months, very often with that, before they get a break, because you have to. And many, I learned that the hard way, but you need to understand that, yes, life is tough, life will be difficult, and there are periods where you're going to have to push hard, but you need to put in breaks so that you can recharge and get back to normal and rebuild those batteries, those pillars that are that foundation, like you say, for mental toughness.
So let's look at those 5 areas. So the ones I wrote down, and feel free to add to it, but diet, sleep, strength, flexibility, and spiritual cognitive resilience. In those 5 areas, are there specific aspects of one or a couple of those that when you're working through those with someone might surprise people about the way you go about doing that?
I think that really what we're trying to do is to recognize that the athlete is a person as a whole, and recognizing that if you need to treat the person before the player, or you need to treat the person before the executive. And I think it's important to recognize that the Soviets used the term functional reserve. In other words, we have a certain amount of, in Eastern medicine they refer to chi, or we have a certain amount of energy. Our body allocates that depending on the demands of the time. But you need to recognize that diet, sleep, rest, all of these things contribute to the so-called, master battery that we have, that is there for us when we need it most, when we draw on resources. That's why, for example, if we cut corners on sleep and food, we might end up with a cold, or we might end up with sleep issues. But we draw energy from other parts in our body to compensate at any point in time.
Your new book, first of all, love the title. I don't know if that was yours or somebody walked you through that, but you nailed it. It's titled Game Changer, The Art of Sports Science. Perfect combination. It looks fantastic. Could you give us a couple of highlights that might be of particular interest to health and wellness coaches or folks that they're wanting to improve their own health and wellness in their lives?
Yeah, so the book was written primarily for team sports coaches, and so what I did essentially was I wrote out all the principles that I've used working across all of these different sports, which nobody really had worked full time in the NFL or in international rugby in the Premier League. And as I went from each sport to sport, I recognized there were common principles, and that's what I put together. And it caused a lot of interest among coaches initially, because they started to realize there's a lot I can learn from these other sports. And also, one of the sections is about the athlete as a person, and how it's essentially the same athlete in every sport. It's just that the skill is slightly different. Like the same psychological components profile can be used, same physical, etc. And even if you want to look at it same tactically, you have to find space, you have to close space. But the person is the exact same. And the fourth section is about teamwork culture and about how they are the same common themes in every sport. Like, what does it take to create a high performance team? And then what ended up happening, ironically, were that a lot of coaches who were coaching, part-time, or coaching their kids, local softball, lacrosse, football team, started to realize that these principles of particularly teamwork and functioning apply directly to their corporate culture. And so I started to get more and more inquiries and contact from people who are working, for example, in law firms, attorneys, traders even, who had heard about the book, had started to use it for coaching their kids, and realized, hang on a second, these principles apply to me. They apply to my staff. And so many of them, I've worked with one company actually developing that TTPP model, which is tactical, technical, physical, and psychological model, to help them profile their staff actually for long-term development, for health and wellness, and then with some military groups as well, using the exact same profiling approach.
It's just so interesting how the consistency, like you said, across athletes, but then across military, across executives, across your neighbor. I mean, it's just, it's so interesting how it comes down to the core. All right. Your TED Talk, really interesting. People that haven't seen you, they got to pull that one up. You have this quote in there: authentic people aren't perfect. Perfect people aren't authentic. Everyone can benefit from that message, but I think it's particularly valuable to those of us that are in the health and wellness arena. Can you take us beyond the quotes on what this is really getting into?
So somebody said to me before, you need to, give a TED talk about, how, transitioning from a PhD in computers to working in elite sport, and just your journey, or about different aspects, different stories, things that have happened. The last thing I expected to be doing was giving a TED talk about somebody who's a coach in elite performance, about themselves burning out. And that's really where the TED talk revolves around how I was working with a group of special forces operators. And they asked, after teaching them, about particular aspects of teamwork and culture and performance, I was asked, what was your greatest failure? And, I told a story about myself burning out, getting a DUI. But it was important for me because when I finished the story, the the most senior officer looked straight across at me and said, "Yeah, that's exactly what happens to us." And after it happened, I had so many very well-known athletes, some of the most famous athletes in the country, actually, who I'd been fortunate to work with, reached out to me, and they shared stories of failure or screw-ups that they had that even I didn't know, and I'd worked with some of these very, very closely. And I realized that everybody screws up and everybody makes mistakes. Some of them you hear about, some of them you don't. But that in itself is an important message, because today, with social media, we are presented with images of perfection, success, happiness constantly. And the illusion, particularly for younger people coming through, is that, well, if you're not happy and you're not a millionaire, you're not successful. And so it helped me share that. The story has helped me help so many people, where I've been able to help people redefine what success really is for them.
All right. So in terms of human performance, that's your specialty. Let's talk two different levels, and I'm sure there's some overlap here. But some of the basics, when you're helping somebody just get out of the gate, they're coming to you after long history, you're just kind of on cruise control, and they come to you and say, "Fergus, it's time for me to step up." So they're at the more basic level, and then at the elite level, someone that's pretty dialed in. So this isn't just the gifted athlete, but somebody who's really dialed in. And they're looking for that last little, 1 to 2%. Can you walk us through first the basic? Where do you start? How do you start to integrate that for we'll call them a newcomer? And then what's that last 1 to 2%? What does that involve?
So what's interesting is that very often and this might be a surprise, with elite performers, very often they have certain things dialed in exceptionally well. So in some cases, I've had NFL linebackers come to me with very detailed, dialed in diet and supplement programs. And so it's recognizing, again, back to this idea of surfaces and gaps, what they've got very, very well tuned in. But in some cases, they can be weaknesses where they over-focus on, for example, supplementation, and they're missing some key things. So it's, first of all, about evaluating where they are strong, making sure that their strengths aren't themselves becoming weaknesses themselves. Then secondly, helping identify what their needs are and their fears. So in some cases, athletes struggle with, they have a perception of something that they need to improve. And that's driven perhaps by a fear. So it might be that, their contract or whatever is up for renewal, or they're in competition. So it's recognizing what that fear is, but then truly helping them identify what the real need is. And those are two completely different things. Sometimes they have, like I say, a false perception of what it is that they need. So helping them recognize, and they have the answer. I don't have the answer.
Sure.
But I can ask questions to identify truly what the need is, and then helping them, come to the conclusion, okay, this is really what I need to focus on, which is, my long-term health, my long-term welfare. It may be, in some cases, a family issue, or it may be helping them recognize, these are the things that are actually draining my energy, and really helping them come to the conclusion, and then helping create a program whereby they can develop that or work on that. And what you tend to find very often in elite performers in the sports field, the sports arena, the physical qualities generally are pretty good, but some of them kind of compensated, by not doing a lot of prehab work, or maybe they're, the body's being held together, because they're able to compensate. So it's helping identify maybe some physical things, but largely you find that over time, it's about helping them create a spiritual model for life. And I don't necessarily mean from a faith perspective, but helping them recognize what's really important to them in their life, because very often that's irritating them deep down, and that's sometimes something that they struggle with, because, and particularly now, and this will apply to your listeners, what you end up dealing with with high achievers are that they have fallen into a pathway, a career, a profession, a title, an expectation of perfection and overachieving.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very narrow, it's very specialized, and they've neglected other areas of their life. And those are the areas that it's like hitting a speed bump or getting a flat tire at a very, very high speed. Everything's going fine until, you hit that speed bump, hit a pothole, and then things start to spin out of control. It's having those other foundational pieces, good lifestyle, good family, good network, good support. Those are the things that you need to sustain the elite performer over time. And I can equate it perhaps to an incredibly successful athlete who gets his first serious injury and now is facing 4 months or 6 months of rehab away from the team, a lot of lonely time. That's when the questions start to eat away at the athlete.
And then for the person that's just getting, that is great, by the way, for the person that's just waking up and saying, okay, I'm tired of average, it's time for me to step up, where do you start with them?
With many of those people, a lot of it is about identifying the areas where they can make slow improvements. But first of all, you want to establish with them an actual vision of what they can achieve, and understanding that, okay, this is where you want to get to, this is what it's going to take, but helping them slowly develop over time, and bringing that picture into fruition and saying, okay, these are the stages that you're going to have to undertake to get there, and making sure that the vision is reasonable and that we're going to bite it off in small chunks and we're going to take care of it. But also, one just careful point is making sure that the vision is one that is wholesome and honorable, so to speak, so that this is something that you can genuinely support, that they're doing it for the right reasons, so that you build sustainable success. Like I can take anybody and drop body weight in X amount of time,
sure,
very, very quickly, or I can even drop body fat very, very quickly. But am I creating sustainable habits that are going to truly impact this person in a positive way, and so they can continue when I'm not there to continue to make progress?
Before I forget, what's the best way for folks to follow you? I know this is fun, and I know people are sitting here going, "I gotta keep track of this guy." I know you're on Twitter. Is that the best way for people to kind of keep up with you?
Yeah, Twitter's probably the easiest.
And what is that?
It's Fergus _Connolly, FERGUS _CONNOLLY. And yeah, or just go to my website, fergusconnolly.com.
Okay,
but
perfect.
But again, I think for a lot of coaches, the biggest challenge I think that coaches have is recognizing, the holistic nature of their impact, and recognizing that, I would have made this mistake. I'm sure everybody has done it. Somebody comes to you with an issue, and before they've even finished explaining, you've got the answer straight to them. You need to do this, you need to do that. I've learned over the years to take my time and let them talk themselves out, because slowly you realize that, for example, if they come to you with a dietary issue, that very often is not at the core of the concern that they have.
Exactly.
And then the other thing is drawing on experts like Dr. Singh and others who you need to learn from the specialists, so that you can become a better generalist. Like, David Epstein sent me a preview copy of his book Range, and I could have sworn it was a biography of my experience, because like I said early on, I studied nutrition, supplementation, biomechanics, neurology, all of these different things to try and find solutions. And he was writing this book that was basically outlining how great high achievers have, yes, they have a specialism, but it's built on this generalist foundation, or in this generalist environment.
We had a chance to interview David. Oh, it's been 3-4 months ago now. So same thing. I read an advanced copy and exactly what you said. That's why I'm laughing, because I felt like, oh my gosh, he's been following me around. This is psychotic. What's going on here?
No,
So yes.
it's incredible, and he's, first of all, just like Dr. Singh, he's an incredible person, been an
Oh,
incredible help to me personally, a wonderful guy, but his writing, and he like he even quoted Werner von Braun in it, and I'm going, man, this is just, these are all these different people and different inspirations. Really, really good, really, really good guy, and a fascinating insight into performance and into how people really function in today's society, because it is changing a lot as well. And I think that social media has some wonderful benefits, but some of the things we just need to be aware of is the deluge of information, and a lot of the I don't want to call them false narratives, but perhaps inaccurate images that are portrayed that influence the people that we work with.
okay. So two things. You will just build off this. We talked about your Twitter account, and I just read you tweeted out an article about the importance of consistent reading. We've just been talking about David's book,
Yes.
Outstanding Book Range. So good timing for this question. The statistics on reading are they're just sad. I mean, people, even if they buy a book, the fact that only a certain percent get through the first 3 chapters is it's just very low. So could you provide us a boost for those people that have good intentions? They say, I enjoy reading. I want to read, but I just don't. So for those that need a stronger why, I don't know about reading, and maybe a strategy for making it a consistent part of their life. If you've seen something that has helped you, or you've seen something with your clients that you've encouraged them, just give us some tips, because I think there's so much out there. Obviously they're listening to podcasts like this to get that kind of information, but there's so many valuable insights in these books, and we're missing out. So a stronger why you might be able to help us with, and then maybe a little bit of a strategy on how to integrate that into our lives, if you have any tips along those lines.
Yeah, so I've opened up 1 or 2 talks that I've given by describing myself as the world's greatest thief, and one of the things that I stole from an article, I think, no, it was a book I read about Michael Jordan, was about Phil Jackson giving books
Yes.
to his players, and I stole that idea, and I would do the same, whether it was at Michigan or at the San Francisco 49ers, and I would give books to guys who I knew would read. Others I would give short articles to, and I would try and pick articles actually that had extracts from books, in the hope that they would inspire some guys, and some would and some wouldn't. But it's also important to recognize that not everybody wants to read, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
So it's understanding that in some cases we have to spend a lot of time on selling ideas and concepts. For me personally, as a professional, I try and read, not as much as I can. I read because I'm passionate about it, learning these different things. And I read lots of different styles of books, like a book like David's, whatever I'd read. But I've also purchased graphic novels to read them, to understand how and why some of them are so successful at getting their message across. And I've tried to read many different types of writing to understand, why is this book so successful and others aren't. And so very often I recommend to people short books starting, so that they see the value of reading. So, one of the books that I recommend constantly is Who Moved My Cheese, which is just an incredibly short book. You can read it in 30 minutes.
Yep.
And that has just a really simple message. People get the message and they go, okay. And if they enjoy reading that, then I can start to introduce them to, maybe a slightly longer book, or to, a book with a series of short stories or short anecdotes. And so I wrote Game Changer. I also wrote a second book called 59 Lessons. I'm not trying to sell the book, but they're 2 completely different styles. The second book, 59 Lessons, is just a series of short stories, because I realized that a lot of people read books that had short stories with a moral or a message, and I wanted to see how different, would it appeal to different demographics and different audiences. So my approach in helping encouraging others is always try and find a book that I can use as a wedge to get them started, and then slowly say, hey, you might really like this story, or this person's story is actually similar to yours. And that's what I've done with a lot of athletes and executives as well. And handing them a huge a very thick book to start is generally not going to work well unless they're an avid reader. And so the other thing you'd see articles from time to time that say that, this incredibly successful business person reads, 7 books a week or whatever. And I just, I roll my eyes. That's like, the guy saying, well, I sleep only 3 hours a night.
Right.
Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah. Whatever.
Sure you do.
Like,
Last night.
Exactly. Once. Yeah. And so, and those are the kind of things that I think people find, I think that's one of the things that I'm fortunate to be able to explain to people, that, somebody will say, oh, well, this person does this, or this person only does this, or they never have a rest day, or they listen. I can tell you the truth. Right. And the truth is not a lot different, but there's a reason, and here's the rationale. And I've been there. I'll never forget actually giving a talk in Boston a number of years ago, and a coach put his hand up and told me how the team that I was working with were monitoring their players 24 hours a day using this particular technology. And, I just told them, I said, no, we don't. He said, oh, well, I read it in this article. And I said, yeah, I've read that article too. And the journalist misunderstood what was being said. And it's just fascinating how misinformation can, I think it's Winston Churchill said that a lie gets around the world before the truth has had a chance to put his pants on. And so it's always interesting to be able to help people understand what the reality really is.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. All right, just 2 more. Let's personalize the human performance journey a little bit. How are you applying your insights, the things you're reading, the things you're learning, the things you're using in an area where you're looking to optimize your own health and wellness?
I think sleep, is something that, and Dr. Singh has been a huge help to me in improving the quality of my sleep. And I go to bed earlier. I do get up early still, but I enjoy getting up early. I've always gotten up early, and it allows me. There's something about getting up and just getting my day organized properly.
Running start.
Before, I don't want to say before the sun comes up, because that sounds bragging. It's not that in essence, but it's just getting some quiet time to myself. The other thing that I've started to do more of is to, before I go to bed, just have a look at what's coming the following day, so that I'm aware of it. I think the other thing that I've started to do a lot more of is to embrace failures or negative things, because it's something that I've learned over the years, is that people talk about having gratitude for positive things that have happened. For me, I spend a lot of time having gratitude for negative events that happen, because it allows me to embrace them and recognize that these are learning opportunities, they're not failures. And that has had an incredible benefit for me. And it's something that, somebody drew it to my attention some time ago. They said, I was talking about something I'd screwed up, and they were going, yeah, but, is this the first time you failed? And I've gone, no. And they said, well, write down a list of all the failures that or things you regard as failure. And I did. But as I was putting the list together, before I got back to them, I realized why they wanted me to do it was because I was having a very difficult time in actually truly identifying them as failures. Every time that something negative had happened, or I thought at that time it was a negative thing, what happened afterwards was an opportunity, which was another direction I went in that became incredibly successful. And so really what happens, what we think are failures or setbacks, are actually opportunities, if you choose to see them as such. If that's the most important point. And that's something that I've been able to use with a lot of clients, because now I work more in the corporate sector with clients that has been incredibly beneficial for them, and helping them recognize as well the difference between pleasure, happiness, and contentment. Pleasure is fleeting. They're fleeting moments of, for example, love or whatever. Happiness is, you've happy days, you've down days. But we really should be striving for contentment, which is where recognizing that, there will be happy moments, there'll be sad moments, but not fluctuating excessively within those moments, and finding that place of contentment.
This is so good. Loving this. All right, last question. Just wide open, any final words of wisdom for those that are either trying to help others improve their health and wellness, or they're on this journey themselves and they're listening to this because they're looking for ideas. Just anything I haven't teed up with a question up to this point.
Oh wow, we could keep going. I think that the important thing for people is to recognize there are four things that I think are critical to all high achievers in my experience. And this is something I've refined particularly over the last 2 years. I think the first thing is, who are you? So there are these two very old philosophical questions. Who am I and why am I here? And that's the first question, is that who are you? Like, what is your identity? And that means recognizing what your strengths and limitations are. It doesn't mean that you're a good person, a bad person. It just means nobody's perfect. So what are the things you're really, really good at? And, protect them, bolster them. The things that you've limitations with, you've got to work on, and you got to just recognize them. And by recognizing them, not running from your limitations, not running away from them, then you'll find that's one of the steps on the road to contentment. The second thing is recognizing what's your true purpose. Like what is your superpower, so to speak? What are the things that, on your deathbed that you want to be recognized for? And it probably not going to be your bank account or, the goal that you scored as in sophomore or whatever. It's, so what is your, who are you and what's your purpose? Why are you here? The third thing then is this idea of a spiritual model. I'm not talking about faith or religion per se, but how do you explain the world to yourself? Because yes, science can explain a certain amount, but how do you explain the world? And one of those things is recognizing we're not truly in control, which is a whole other area with high achievers.
Sure.
Because high achievers have generated an illusion in a small sphere of expertise that they're in control. You're not. You have a lot of expertise that allows you increase the probability of success, but you're never truly in control. And that's something that high achievers forget over time. But anyway, like I said, it's a whole other conversation. And the fourth thing then is, to love and be loved, because nobody is an island. Nobody can exist on their own. So in terms of your community, your tribe, your family, those are the four key things I think that, people should strive to understand more of: your identity, your purpose, your spiritual model, and, to love and be loved. And then in terms of the practitioner, I think the most important thing is to truly enjoy learning and everything about human performance. I was fortunate or naive or stubborn enough just to be wonderfully interested in all these things. And I've realized that so many of them complement my understanding of different things, and not to become too specialized. So I think that's a nod to range.
Dr. Connolly, this was so fun. Great stuff. Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
A big thank you again to Dr. Fergus Connolly. Just so many great insights. By the way, he shared a few times about having a clear vision. So important. If you're new to the podcast, we did have an episode that was completely devoted to the process of identifying and developing and clarifying that clear vision. So you may want to check that out. It came out on December 30th of 2019, and it might be worth a peek if that suggestion that he had resonated with you. For those of you who are already health and wellness coaches, have you heard about the Rocky Mountain Coaching Retreat and Symposium? It's taking place in Estes Park, Colorado, September 18th through the 20th. And it not only provides you with new coaching tools, CEUs, the typical things, but you will also have a great opportunity. It's really the focus of the event to get that refreshment back, that rejuvenation, and recapture that passion that we had, hopefully still have, for coaching. We've dialed in the speakers, the agenda, and the early registration rate is currently available for those who would like to join us. You can find all the details under the retreat tab at catalystcoachinginstitute.com, or feel free to reach out to us anytime. Questions, you want to talk it through, find out what it's all about, results at catalystcoachinginstitute.com. Now, it's time for better. Let's do this. Pursuing better than yesterday in our own lives and helping those around us do exactly the same. Life is tough, folks, but together we can move toward better, one step at a time. Thanks for joining us. This is Dr. Bradford Cooper signing off. Make it a great rest of your day, and I'll speak with you soon on the next episode of the Catalyst Health and Wellness Coaching Podcast.